Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, on this beautiful March 21st, here in the CL and Connolly Council Chambers, 4th floor of the Cuyahoga County headquarters. And could I have a roll call, please?
And just as a reminder to all who are in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is here. There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Sweeney is in attendance.
Welcome, Councilman Sweeney. In your package, ladies and gentlemen, you have the minutes of the February 21st meeting. If they're in order, I'll accept the motion in a second.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? 0230005.
And also like the record to reflect that Ms. Conwell is in attendance and Councilmember Miller is in attendance.
Welcome.
Calling the, I'm so sorry. Ordinance number 2023-0005, renumbering section 202.07 of the county code to 204.02 and to clarify the duties of the county sheriff's department and the county sheriff.
Okay. This is legislation submitted by Mr. Kelly, and I'm a co-sponsor on that, but I'm going to allow Mr. Kelly to take the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2019, the voters of Cuyahoga County approved a charter amendment recommended by this council to make the sheriff a more empowered, independent role in county government. The approved charter amendment basically provided the sheriff the same level of autonomy as our inspector general. Like the inspector general, the sheriff serves a fixed 4-year term and can only be removed from office for cause by a supermajority of this council. As the county's chief law enforcement officer, the sheriff is charged with running the county jail and oversees a budget of $135 million and roughly 1,000 employees. I believe it is critically important that any sheriff take authority and ownership over the day-to-day operations of their department and the discharge of their duties without interference or micromanagement by the county executive or the council. To be clear, this does not mean the sheriff is unaccountable to anyone. The sheriff must stand for reappointment and confirmation every 4 years and can be removed by council for proper cause. As with the inspector general, council also retains the authority to approve the sheriff's budget and may impose powers and duties upon the sheriff that are not inconsistent with the powers and duties conferred by the charter or state law. This ordinance is simply intended to memorialize and complement the 2019 charter amendment approved by the voters in our county code by formally establishing the sheriff's department as an independent entity, and also establishes basic reporting requirements to ensure that both the council and the executive are able to conduct proper oversight of the sheriff's department. I've asked Mike King from council staff to provide a brief overview of the details of the legislation, after which I'm happy to take any questions from my colleagues.
Thank you, Councilman Kelly. Chairman Gallagher. As stated, the primary change in this ordinance makes it to essentially recodify the sheriff's department in our county code as an independent entity similar to the inspector general. In addition, the ordinance makes a few technical clarifying changes that I'll run through now. First, it requires the sheriff to issue quarterly reports to both the county executive and the council regarding the operations of the department and to provide additional information upon request of either the executive or council. Second, it codifies a legal opinion issued by our law department last year, which acknowledges the sheriff is now its own standalone appointing authority under our charter, and in turn recognizes the human resources functions that are associated with that. And then third, it clarifies that the sheriff's department must comply with the council-approved employment practices, procurement policies, and budget procedures already codified in our county charter and code that apply to the employees under the jurisdiction of the county executive. So I'm happy to take any questions about specific provisions, but otherwise I'll defer to Councilman Kelly and Chairman Gallagher to address the merits of the proposed ordinance.
Questions for Mr. King or Mr.
Sure.
Kelly? Mr. Tuma.
Thank you. I would think Mr. King. Mike, is this something that would have to be put forth for a vote to change the charter, or is this something that we can do through council action?
This is something that that council can approve. Council has the authority under the charter to establish departments and agencies in our code. This, as I think Councilman Kelly stated, is consistent with the charter amendment that was approved by the voters in 2019. So it is not it imposes reporting requirements that aren't contemplated in that charter amendment per se, but it is not in conflict. So it is something that the council can approve without separate approval by the voters.
So if I could follow up, as far as the 2019 charter amendment, I remember working on that, but what is the main difference between this? Is this like adding a little muscle to that amendment, or because I mean, other than a reporting requirement, I'm just curious as to what we're doing.
Yeah, so prior to the 2019 charter amendment, the council actually codified the sheriff's department in code. And right now it currently sits in chapter 202.07 of our code. And that chapter is one of those sections under the authority of the county executive. And so that had been codified prior to the change in the charter. This principally, and I think the primary change here is would move the sheriff's department from that section of the code to the section of the code dealing with independent entities. And that section includes the Inspector General, and I believe potentially our internal audit department. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that is, I think, the primary difference is it essentially moves that section of the code from one chapter to another.
Okay, and then one last question is, I understand. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh no, okay. That's your call. I'm sorry. Where was I? I think I understand the nature of what this legislation is trying to do. Would there be? Could it be posed that the sheriff's department, or what the sheriff would do, would be more analogous to what the county medical examiner's office would be, as opposed to like the inspector general? Because, you know, the county medical examiner used to be a elected position as well. There doesn't seem to be the same types of issues in that office. You know, he does report to us when he feels necessary. Doesn't seem like he gets much interference from administration on things. So I'm just trying to hash this out in my head.
No, that's a very fair question. So my understanding, if my recollection is correct, the medical examiner is an officer under Article 5 of our charter, meaning that he serves at the pleasure of the county executive. So the medical examiner could be appointed, confirmed, subject to council, and removed by the county executive, you know, basically for no reason. The sheriff is somewhat different in nature due to the fact that the sheriff now, with the adoption of the charter amendment, can only be removed for cause and serves a fixed term and stands for reappointment at that expiration of each.
Would this legislation taking the sheriff out of the purview of the county executive, would this still allow the county executive to have an opportunity to remove for cause, or does that remove his or her ability to do so?
Well, the charter amendment effectively has already removed that ability. I believe the county executive could always recommend a duly appointed sheriff be removed for cause, but it would ultimately come down to I think 8 members of council would ultimately have to vote.
So that stays the same.
Correct.
But he or she could institute procedures to do so.
Correct.
They're not prohibited from doing so.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Thank you, that's all.
I think Conwell was first.
Conwell, Simon, and Miller.
All right, through the chair to Mike, I just need a little bit more clarification. Tuma asked a lot of questions that I had. So basically, what is this adding? I should say adding to the last time that we did something.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say, the sort of major addition to this, right? Because the charter says that the sheriff, the duly appointed sheriff, performs those powers and duties imposed upon sheriffs by general law, so state law, and in addition, gives the council the ability to impose additional powers and duties not inconsistent with state law. I think the primary addition in this piece of legislation is it's essentially a reporting requirement. So it requires the sheriff to report both to the council and to the county executive as the appointing, confirming, and possible removal authorities for the sheriff's office once a quarter, and imposes the additional requirement that the sheriff provide additional information upon request.
So they're still, he or she is still going to report to the county exec.
That is, I think, an open question. The charter doesn't specify, either for the sheriff or for any of the other Article 5 officers, a reporting structure. That is more of an administrative function than a sort of legislative or charter mandated function. So I know that's been a large topic of discussion. This is merely meant to memorialize, I think, the nature of the charter change that went into effect in 2019, which principally changed, in addition to the qualifications of the office, the appointment and removal procedures.
First of all, thank you for bringing this to us. It seems like this is going to be an ongoing theme for a while. We know that the charter says that the executive supervises these offices, correct?
The charter says that the council has the authority to establish departments under the supervision of the county executive.
Gotcha.
And as currently constituted, the sheriff's department is within that
Yes.
section of our code.
Yes, so we know that the supervisor of the sheriff is the executive. So I don't know why we have ongoing discussion about that. That's clear. The reason, I want to just go back a minute. You know, this is analogous to the Inspector General change we made, that, you know, the Inspector General is neutral and doesn't necessarily report to either. The reason for that is because the Inspector General's power is to investigate the executive and council. That's why we had to remove the Inspector General from reporting to the executive, so it would alleviate any bias in the Inspector General's position of investigation. This is different. There's no issue about a similar analogous reason to change the structure of the sheriff's reporting to the executive. So I just want to be clear that that was why we did that for the Inspector General. And I want to say that it all goes back to whether the sheriff, I suppose from my colleagues, have legitimate reasons, and I respect those reasons why they believe the sheriff should not have to report essentially to anybody but a voter. And I can bring us back to the first administration under Ed Fitzgerald, where we had county stats. And those stats were very specific to each department to measure what the performance was in each department. And I recall that under those county stats, and I'm sorry we don't have that anymore, and I hope we can reinstitute that the sheriff department was not living up to the expectations of those stats, including but not limited to executing warrants. There was, I believe, thousands of warrants out there that were not being executed. They were just waiting for somebody to be picked up in a vehicle for speeding. That wasn't getting done. They couldn't manage OT, if you remember, a series of committee hearings over why is the sheriff department repeatedly have this high level of OT when at the time we didn't have the shortage issue that we have today. There were issues of misconduct that were not taken seriously. And I want to highlight that for me, that this is a time where we're seeing the abuse of power, of discrimination, racial disparity in our criminal justice system, which is it spills over into police issues, which I can't exclude sheriffs, and I have no reason to believe our current sheriff and people who work for him, under the executive, are abusing power. But I want to have something in place that we can oversee what's happening. The city of Cleveland has a consent decree. They have a commission. I think the city of Akron now has a commission. There's always, I think it's very important for us to have a level of oversight so that doesn't happen here. And it can happen here, you know? And so these are reasons why I don't agree with this at all. And it's going to spill over into discussions about an elective sheriff. This is just a stopgap. And I don't believe we need this. It doesn't add, but it totally takes away from oversight. So those are just my comments, and I hope we can start looking at these stats, and I'm going to ask to go back to see if we have them on record of what was happening at the sheriff department during those years, because right now, when we had our past administration, I thought went on the wayside, so there's no way to measure. And if we go back to, having no oversight, I don't know what's going to be happening there and what happens with our budget. So I really think we need the safeguard in place. Those are my reasons for not supporting this piece of legislation.
Just real quick through the chair to the councilwoman. When you say there were like statistics or measures by the Fitzgerald administration, are you referring to the sheriff's department with an elected sheriff or during his time as county executive?
Well, there wasn't an elected sheriff during the time of Executive Fitzgerald.
I
That was
said,
a
are you
new
referring to a
government.
prior, were the statistics
They were for current sheriffs during that time.
during that time?
And Jennifer Schofield was the one in charge, and Matt Carroll was in charge, and it took it very seriously. It was a way to measure each department, and the sheriff's department was being measured, and it was not living up to the expectation of what we expected, what the administration expected, and that's partially why I think it's important that we continue to have this oversight. If not, nobody's really able to get into the weeds, and the voters can't.
Okay, no, I just think that it always comes down to having good people in place.
It totally does.
Whether you're elected, whether you're appointed.
Totally does.
It's always about who's running the show.
But we also need that oversight, in my opinion, and I'd love to put something in place again, and maybe with council's help, we can get that department back with the administration to be aggressively measuring different departments. So that was under Fitzgerald.
Mr. President, and to my colleagues, I agree with what Ms. Simon said, that the Inspector General and the Internal Audit Department are not analogous to the Sheriff's Office. Those two departments, they're not policy-making departments. Their purpose is oversight. And in the case of the sheriff, the sheriff plays a major role in determining the public safety policy for Cuyahoga County, and I'm a strong believer that in what we're trying to do with the charter, which is that you don't want to have 5 or 6 different little fiefdoms pulling in different directions. You want to have a unified county policy and strategy that flows through the executive, and for that reason, I do think it's good that for day-to-day operations that the sheriff have a good amount of independence and autonomy, but when it comes to developing broad policy for public safety for the county, that the sheriff should report directly to the county executive and should be one of the agencies that the executive supervises, rather than being off there on its own like the Inspector General and the Internal Audit. So, and the other thing that I would say is that I know that a lot of this whole discussion is motivated by concerns about the problems that we've had at the jail. And it's my belief that there are things that are more important in determining how well the jail functions than whether the sheriff is appointed or elected and who the sheriff reports to. In particular, I would talk about measurement. We don't have good measures of things like inmate length of stay, and we learned that we don't keep track of cases where a person is held beyond their intended release date. I also think that that our measures of racial disparity, we probably don't have good enough measurement systems to determine how that relates to what we do at the jail. And it's a question of number one, what information we collect and how we collect it, and then how do we use that information to improve real-world decision-making. And I think we have a long way to go on that, and that's where our focus should be. And so to my mind, I did not see the sheriff's office charter amendment as intending to create the county sheriff as a completely independent office that doesn't directly report to anybody on a regular basis. I saw it more as aiming to create a greater degree of independence by insulating the sheriff from being fired at whim, and so that's my take on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to committee members, thank you for allowing me to be part of the committee today, Michael. And first, I want to commend Councilman Kelly for putting this forward, because this has been around for 2 years. When the council president and I first started talking about my opinion of the sheriff reporting directly to the executive, he shared with me in the hallway he has another thought coming. And when, after the committee that I had the privilege of testifying in the previous committee, Trevor in the back said there was a piece of legislation that I believe was authored by the council president, and it's the same piece of legislation. So 2 different ideas to talk about. And the one question with this piece of legislation is, for me, the key word is reports. Can you define that for me through the chair?
To the councilman through the chair, I don't know that I can define reports.
Can we define it through legislation if we decide to?
The council potentially could. It is not something that currently is addressed in either the charter or our code. So it would be something that council would be defining.
Got it. And through your discussions, what would you say with this piece of legislation right now? What is the definition of reports? We know it's quarterly, but what does that entitle? And I don't have a firm belief of Councilman Miller and Simon is different than the IGs and the auditors. And by charter, we know how the IG reports. It is twice a year, must be posted online, and we have had a custom, I believe, at least for the 2 years I've been here, and I believe it's the 12 years we've been in existence, that the independent or the IG comes to the choir or the council operations committee and makes a in-person report. And that operation has 5 people, and the sheriff has 1,142, I believe. So that's way too long of a question, but the definition of reports as we speak right now, what would you say that is?
So this legislation, as you said, requires the sheriff to provide quarterly reports to both the executive and the council. It does not detail, it's meant to be about the operations of the sheriff's department, but there are not detailed requirements. There are, the council could theoretically impose, more prescriptive reporting requirements either on the sheriff or any other, county department or agency. But that is, to your point about the inspector general, that is similar to what is in the inspector general, except for the main difference here is this would require the report to both the executive and the council, where I believe is the IG, I don't remember 100%, but I believe the IG only reports to the council on the semi-annual basis.
Thank you. And through the chair to Mike, but in the charter, it says they must give a written report. No, not, they must have a written report posted on the website in the charter for the IG. Is that, because it's defined, then it's at least something.
If not in the charter, I believe that's in our code. I can't remember which, but yes,
It's
that
there
is
somewhere.
a defined, yes.
Yeah, to my colleagues, it's just something, if this moves forward, I'd ask that we better define what the reporting is to the council and to the administration, because I'm pretty much stuck on that. But just on the reporting, I don't know if I should, it causes me concern that, or not concern, it just makes sense to me that reporting to the executive, because the dialogue I heard in the past, there was somewhat outrage that the sheriffs were shaking in their boots. They were feared because the executive could fire them because of the, or terminate them. But because of the charter amendment, that concern is no longer there. And the reporting to the executive without the fear, I believe, would solve some of the concerns in the past. So I'm trying to balance what is the proper reporting and oversight of this. And if it goes this way, the reporting should be more defined, but I'm still a believer of they should report directly to the administration. And then the administration can say, he's doing bad, he can doing good. And council members can check with the administration and say, or the executive, and say, this is what I want. And the concern I have, because this is how we have it, and to Councilwoman Simon's point, it's always been there. But it always hasn't worked that way. Under the previous administration, it was safety director, chief of staff, and executive. I don't know about the other two, or the other one that was executive. So there's no way to force that. So that's why I'm a strong proponent of reporting directly to them. There's no drama about it. And then we know who to exactly ask. And they are, as I said before, because of the latest, or the charter amendment, we have the responsibility and authority to remove a sheriff for a cause. And if we have the ability to remove, as we talked about, we should have their ability to direct, and direct them to say they report to the administration. I didn't mean to bring in my piece of legislation. I did, but I hope I didn't overstep my bounds. And thank you once again, Mr. Kelly, for bringing it up. And Mr. Chairman, I relinquish the floor.
Appreciate all the comments from my colleagues. The reason I brought this forward is that the sheriff is a law enforcement professional. Law enforcement professionals need to be able to do their jobs without someone looking over their shoulder. It's different than a lot of other positions. And if the concern is that there's no reporting to the executive, I mean, any legislation can be tweaked. But the way this is written now gives the sheriff more autonomy than he's had before. And next to an elected a sheriff, this, to me, is the next best thing. And that's the reason I brought it forward. Sheriff needs to be able to do his job and not be worried about doing his job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My point, and I won't belabor my position because everybody knows it. We wouldn't be talking about this if there wasn't a problem. And we certainly wouldn't continue to talk about this if there wasn't a huge problem. And I think about these things, which doesn't make my home life all that great. And I'm like, how did we get here? And nobody really asks that question. Or if they do ask the question, they don't want to pursue it. And the question is, when the people that formulated the charter, all good intended souls, I take it, formulated a charter based on the city of Pittsburgh's county and Summit County. Summit County was the first one in Ohio to do this. And for the most part, they took those two templates and put this together. They kept the elected sheriff. What happened here? And I know in Cuyahoga County, we have an opinion of how more brilliant we are than 87 other counties, but no one ever asked that question, so I did. And I can't even find out. I've heard a story, I don't know if it's true. I really can't figure out how it got to this. What was the input? And most importantly, what was the input from the community of law enforcement? There was none. That I know, there was none. There was no testimony. There were no minutes. There's no transcript. And we accepted it. And the voters voted for it. And I would argue strenuously that the voters had no idea what was going to happen after they passed the charter. They had hopes and prayers that it would work out. And for the most part, I think we've been rather successful, especially this group here. But I think the underlying concern is, how did we get here? Pittsburgh didn't do it, and I can't find information on that if they have the same sheriff 12 years ago. I know Summit County, I don't read anything about Summit County's jail or the sheriff's department. Some of my colleagues took a traipse down to Columbus to look at the jail and had great conversations with their elected sheriff, who was rather direct in telling my colleagues that he was the boss, that this is my jail. And that's just the way it is. And if I screw up, I answer to the voters. I know we're not there, and I know I'm getting close to that. But I'm thinking of pursuing exactly how we got here. What is that story? What was it all McFall? It certainly wasn't Sheriff McFall, because he was a good sheriff. It was Mr. McFall, who was a challenging personality, a bigger-than-life individual. But as far as being a sheriff and running a jail, nobody could come up with any problems there outside of what all the other counties run into. So I think Mr. Kelly was on the right track with this, and I know this has been on the shelf for a couple of years. And I thought, well, if we can't persuade enough council members to go to the ballot, which is fine, that's a personal choice, this might get us a little bit closer. It certainly doesn't satisfy me, but I'm on that island all by myself. But if it's a step in the right direction, then it's a step in the right direction. And let's face it, again, if there wasn't a problem, we wouldn't have had a 2019 vote to alter the charter and what we do with the sheriff. We are historic in the amount of sheriffs that we've had in Ohio. I checked that. We are historic in the amount of interim sheriffs that we've had in Ohio. In the history of the state of Ohio, we're historic, in not a good way. So I think Mr. Kelly's intent here, and especially being a seasoned law enforcement professional, makes me want to support him in this endeavor. When I was a councilman in Strongsville or council president, I never put myself in the place of the police chief or the fire chief or anybody else that was in the administration. We watched them, but if they gave us a recommendation, I had to believe that they knew more than I did. And I do that here. And I did that with the first administration, the second administration, and now this administration. And it's bit me a couple times, I'll admit. But I have to have trust in the individuals that if they come before us and testify and we confirm them, I have to believe in them, that they're better than me at what they're doing. And there's going to be flaws because we're human. But again, I think this gets us a little bit closer. I respect my colleagues and where they're at, but I would prefer to at least try to move us to that next best thing. And again, we all know where I'm at. So that's where I'm at on that. So I support my colleague, Mr. Kelly, in this endeavor. Ms. Simon.
Do you want to go?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so a couple things. Thank you so much. I understand what's behind this, and I would hope that all directors are better than us, and if we don't have trust in our directors, then do we do this with every director then, you know? Public Works not have them report, or, you know, it goes across the board. There's nothing unique about us trusting somebody, but I can tell you that, you know, when we look at George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, you know, Eric Garner, all of these incidents that don't stop, I do believe we need to look over the shoulder of law enforcement. And that's the philosophical difference that brings us here, you know, that I think we do need to. That's why we have 2 consent decrees, or at least 1 in Cleveland and in Summit County. I believe we need to oversee this. And does that mean a more rigorous reporting? Maybe I'm going to look at Councilman Sweeney's legislation at this point. I didn't like the compromise there that council is the body that actually decides whether to remove a sheriff, because that requires us then to get into the weeds. Then that becomes our job to see what's happening in there, and the executive actually is off the hook if something were to occur. So maybe we do need to spell that out a little bit differently to say, yes, sheriff reports to both, and at least we'll get a report, because I want to know actually today what the if the chair would indulge me before we end, I want to find out what's happening with the warrants and our sheriffs in the audience. Thank you. So I do need, this is the philosophical difference. I do want oversight. I do want our executive or council to be looking over law enforcement, considering the systemic racism, disparity, everything else we're seeing throughout this country. And I don't think that we're any different in terms of what potentially could occur here with excessive force. And so that's where I am. And, you know, in terms of better than us, they know more, but not everything. And I think that's why we have a check and a balance government. So I will defer to my colleague.
Yes, so through the chair, I don't even know. Yeah, to Mike. So whose job will it be to establish the reporting criteria? Because that was kind of one of my dilemmas as well. So we put in the legislation that somebody should report something, but to Sweeney's point, what are we reporting, and who is going to be not mandated, but given that job duty to read reports? I mean, we have reporting in a lot of scenarios, but people don't read them, or they're not staying. If this is truly about oversight and making sure that the sheriff has some sort of autonomy, somebody's going to need to, and for our oversight to know what the sheriff is doing over there, we need to know these answers before this moves forward. It's easy to say reporting, but I think we need a little bit more clarification. What does that reporting look like?
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman. And to your point, yes, absolutely. This council could flesh out and delineate, specific reporting requirements in legislation that the sheriff would have to provide. This particular proposal does include what I would consider to be somewhat of a catch-all, in that it allows both the executive and the council to request additional information from the sheriff. So if a sheriff were to provide a report that didn't include some basic metric that the council wanted to know about, say the jail population, whatever it might be, just as an example, the council would have the ability to request that additional information and/or sort of set that expectation that the quarterly reports include certain types of information. So it could be done legislatively. I think it could also be done in practice as well. But yeah, absolutely, that is something that could be spelled out.
So don't you agree that it should be in this form of legislation? I mean, I don't know where the votes are right now. It's either we're going to be inclusive of reporting process or we're not. all I'm saying is that if we are, if the majority feels that we should have the reporting process, before it passes, let's flesh out what exactly are they going to be reporting to us. We get I think Trevor sends us how many people are in jail now, so we get information now. We need a lot of measurements measured, so I don't know where I'm totally at. My other question would be about the number 2, C2. So it says the sheriff shall employ and supervise such number of deputies and assistants and so on and so on. I thought HR was established already over there, where the sheriff already has the autonomy to hire individuals. So I didn't understand why this was re-put in there, or.
That's correct. Again, that specific change is meant to clean up the existing code that was adopted prior to the charter amendment. The law department has essentially opined that the sheriff is his own appointing authority right now, and they have their own HR functions over there. So this is just codifying, I would say, the status quo.
Okay. So to make sure that wasn't something new, because we're already doing it. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know.
Just a few comments very quick. I think one of the things that we as a body are trying to hash out is accountability and autonomy. Accountability for the sheriff, while at the same time allowing the sheriff to have the autonomy to make jail decisions. So I think this legislation, I think it warrants more discussion. I think not necessarily, I'd like more information here maybe from some more parties. Perhaps the county executive might have something to opine on this at some point. And I understand it was just put forth, so I wouldn't expect anything just yet. But, I kind of would like to hear from, the other branch of government on this, to kind of just get his thoughts on this and what he views the sheriff's role in his administration. That might be helpful to hear. Just because, we're the ones making the legislation, creating the legislation, doesn't mean we can't hear from the other branch of government. So I would, again, just like to discuss this a little bit further. I wouldn't just be dismissive of it. And I think everyone has good intentions in trying to reach that balance between accountability and autonomy of the sheriff. So that's my 2 cents for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on my colleagues, Chairman Tuma, he talked about the jail. To me, it's more than the jail, and I think everybody knows it's the operations of the sheriff to, keep peace or whatever, restore order. And the jail is one thing, but the entire operations of the sheriff's responsibility is critical to me, and I believe that takes a tremendous amount of oversight. And it's I think $137 million operation. And being able to ask the question, how is the sheriff doing today? Should we remove him? I want to be able to ask that question to somebody that I can get an answer that I believe is holding the sheriff accountable to what he's doing. So, and it's not about the individual. I think most of the reasons we're here is because of the personalities. And we reacted to the personalities and did the charter amendment, and now we're reacting to personalities to try to do this. For me, it's just putting the structure in place, no matter who the individuals are, and they have to be guided by those and do exactly how we put the structure in place. I can't thank you enough, Mike, for standing there for a very long time. I know it's you're paid to do, but I do appreciate doing all the work on this.
Thank you. Yeah. As far as the ability to find out information, who the sheriff, how things are going, and who the sheriff reported, we could always. It doesn't preclude council from bringing in the sheriff and asking the sheriff questions. I mean, he's sitting right in the back today, and I know he wouldn't hesitate if I called him up to ask him a few questions. So we have that ability, and that's part of our legislative oversight. I won't apologize to anybody for doing our job. I mean, I prefer not to get into the weeds on this stuff. I don't like doing that, but sometimes the job requires that, and I think in this instance, like I said, we're just trying to reach a good, medium here between accountability and autonomy. So I think when duty calls you to serve, you serve, and this is what we're doing with our legislative oversight on this, so.
Simon.
Just as a historical look at this, the reason the reporting is so specific in the IG legislation is because the IG was truly not reporting to anybody. We took away the reporting requirement to the executive, so we had to put something in there that there had to be a way for us to be informed. That's why that went there. But I'm going to say to my colleague, Councilman Sweeney, that I wanted information from former Sheriff Pinckney. And I wasn't getting it. I kept hearing that, he's scared, he doesn't want to be fired, but never once did he come to this podium, unlike our staff who's so brave to stand there for 15 minutes, but not once to tell us what was going on. And I had to subpoena him, that through staff. That was our first county council subpoena that went out to Sheriff Pinckney to bring him up here to tell us what was going on. And he refused and took some kind of fifth because there was litigation. So maybe we do need something, because if I'm hearing rumblings that things are terrible and the sheriff can't do his or her job, then okay, I want that person to be empowered to come to this podium and be able to speak clearly. And if that means we do need a requirement, then maybe I'll look at that, because it took a subpoena to even get him to the podium, and then I still didn't get anything ever to this day.
Yeah, just very briefly, and that's just, the whole thing is reporting. If council wants to be the entity that takes the deep dive in the operations of the sheriff's department, that's what we can do. I just think it makes more sense because of the structure that the executive has put in place, and with his org chart that came out about a month ago, he made it a direct report, as probably 6 or 7 of them are, and I'm willing to give that a shot, and I want to codify it and to take the personalities out of it. But we do have the ability to have the sheriff to come here, and we can grill him. But it's a little, I don't think we're made that way in regards to staff to be able to get as deep dive as we need to be, just on how big this operation is and what every aspect and how well it's running. I'm done. Sorry about that extra one.
First, I'd like to thank Mike for his hard work on this and standing up there and answer all these questions. And I'm fine with keeping this in committee, and if there's any additions or subtractions that we might need on this, I'm fine with this. I just don't want it watered down to the point where it's just not this legislation anymore.
Well, it sounds like I'm hearing some no's and some maybes, and maybe they would want to possibly submit a little alteration here and there. And if that's what they wish to do, I would ask that you send that to Mr. Kelly. We'll hold it in committee. I do want to be not only clear but fair to Cliff Pinckney, who I've been publicly stated, he let me down. We knew before we subpoenaed him he was not going to testify. He had an attorney, and we were told that, but we subpoenaed him anyhow. And then he was willing to testify behind closed doors, and we turned him down. So, to be upfront, I mean, he was in the middle, as we all were, with that court case with Mr. Mills, and he was not going to, as his attorney said, put himself in a position to be indicted. So that was the reason behind that, clearly. So he was willing to, but it had to be behind closed doors, and we said no.
Mr. Chair, I don't remember us saying no. Maybe you did. I did not. And I always, in all deference to you, at no time did I ever say I turned down him from going into a closed meeting to tell us what happened. We still don't know. To this day, we speculate that it was so terrible under the executive that each, we don't have an ounce, iota of evidence or data or documents telling us what occurred. And that subpoena actually was launched from the council floor. When I asked him to come to speak, he refused. So then I went to staff and I said, we need a subpoena, just so we're historically correct. And I wasn't told at that time that he wouldn't testify. It doesn't matter, but he never did. And to this day, I've not once turned him down from telling us what occurred. And this is the whole thing. We speculate why we need to do all these things, but we don't really know. No, not one sheriff has told us what happened. Are they still afraid of being fired? I don't think so. Is there some old boys network in this case that they don't want to speak? I don't know. I don't know. And by the way, I don't want to get into the weeds of the jail operations. I just maybe want to hear from a sheriff once in a while if I hear rumblings that they can't work for an executive, that things are so bad. That would be my angle, so.
Okay. Well, I would, if you need any evidence on what was going on in the jail, I would point you to the transcripts of Mr. Mills's trial, of which I was and Trevor were witnesses. There's a lot that came out, a lot. And I would agree with you, Mr. Pinckney didn't do us any good by not telling us what was going on publicly. But he always seemed willing to do it privately, and it was not helpful. It was not.
Maybe only to you, too, so.
So anyhow, so if you have anything you want to add or subtract from Mr. Kelly's legislation, some of
Just
you.
thank you,
I know where you're at.
Okay.
And I think the world knows where I'm at, so, so sometimes worlds collide. And we'll leave it at that. I will mull over the history of the unelected sheriff. I think it's worth investigating and getting to the root of it. But I don't even know if we can get that, so who knows? Is there anything else?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just had a question for our sheriff. You
Yes,
indulge
ma'am.
me for 5 minutes?
Please?
Less?
Unless he pleads the fifth.
There's no attorney, so I think we're good. Hi, Sheriff. Thank you for coming in to the podium. So the question I have is, how strong is our warrant department and how well are the execution of warrants going? I heard there's a shortage of staff there currently. And if you could give us an idea of how many outstanding, if you need to report back to us, that's fine, how many outstanding warrants we have. Is there a shortage in that department and why? And how are things are going with executing those?
Some of the things we're doing with, court operations, transports, electronic monitoring, all those type of things. We have closed down some of our other divisions to assist in those areas. We do currently still have a warrant division. Our warrant division does go out daily, and they do facilitate the arrest and the search of county warrants and other warrants, bench warrants from the judges. We also are in a partnership with U.S. Marshals that we have. We work with them as well on some of our bigger cases.
Through the chair to the sheriff, would you be able to give us a list and report to us how many outstanding warrants there are and how many people are going, how many deputies go out per day to issue those warrants?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
I a little bit more clarification because there's warrants that we enter through that are coming through, like say for the judges, but also any police agency that enters a felony warrant, those are also entered in, and anybody can go ahead and, any law enforcement officer can arrest an outstanding warrant. So if you're just looking for our own personal warrants, how many are entered, I can get you that number.
Yeah, let's start there. Thank you.